Do you know the feeling of looking out the window while driving at night and seeing something that makes your skin crawl? Or that feeling that something is staring at you from somewhere beyond, giving you goosebumps? If you enjoy hearing about the terrors of night driving, then the following horror stories will definitely freak you out. And for a truly chilling experience, make sure to watch until the very end of this video. I'm in my late 40s and I work as a medical sales rep. I live in Seattle. I was driving to Roslyn, which is about 83 miles. It's a short trip, but it takes you through the forest and a beautiful mountain pass. Luckily for me, it was early fall, so we hadn't gotten any snow yet. Once it snows, that specific route becomes very dangerous, sometimes completely impassable. So I was driving up to Roslyn to go visit family, and also to go see a bunch of doctors while I was there. We have a new product for diabetes. Not important. The drive down was quiet, but kind of eerie. This was strange because I've never felt like this before while driving this particular stretch of road. There were almost no cars on the road, which is really weird since the I-90 is always busy, no matter what time of day it is. Obviously, there are going to be less cars on the road at night, but this was just, I don't know, not right. As I was passing by Catchless Lake, my car started to jerk and sputter. This was worrying because I didn't want to get stuck on this road at night. Eventually, my car recovered and I continued on. I got to Roslyn, spent 2 weeks there, and then it was time to go back home. But I almost didn't make it. I got to the Wildlife Bridge just before the lake where my car had given me trouble earlier, and as I was passing underneath, something big smashed into the side of my car. My immediate thought was that a truck had sideswiped me, but when I looked out the window, every muscle in my body seized up, and I screamed. My body froze. I didn't know if I should speed up or slam on the brakes. Before I could make the decision, I was slammed again, and my car connected with the wall of the bridge. I came to a grinding halt, and this thing stopped as well. It looked like a black panel van, but different somehow. There was some sort of blue and purple light pulsating inside, and I could barely make out the person driving. The steering wheel was also on the right side of the vehicle. Then the person leaned forward, and I remembered why I screamed the first time. It was completely hairless, skin so white that it was almost translucent, and its eyes were black. I mean, completely black. It smiled at me, and there was not a single tooth in sight, just blackened gums. That's when I was absolutely sure that this thing wasn't human. Then the unthinkable happened. It got out of the vehicle and then just stood looking at me. Every single hair on my body stood up, and I thought I was going to be sick. I knew if I stayed in my car, that was it for me. So I scrambled over to reach my other door, flung it open, and then I just ran like hell. When I got to where the lake is closest to the road, don't ask me why, but my instincts told me that I needed to get in the water. By some miracle, I managed to not break any bones, so I jumped into the icy lake. When I turned around, the thing was standing right at the water's edge, looking furious. Then there was a blinding light, and it was gone. We've all heard the phrase, but sometimes the truth really is stranger than fiction. And sometimes those horror movies hold some valuable lessons. I found this out when I traveled through China last year. I was 19, and I wanted to travel a bit before starting university. Since I'm Asian American, I thought that the Asian continent would be an excellent place to explore. I started in Japan, then over to South Korea, took the train to Mongolia, and then on to China. After China, it would have been on to Myanmar, Thailand, and ending my trip in Vietnam. But my trip ended abruptly in China. I was driving through one of the many mountain passes in Tibet, and it was crazy. It's a dirt road snaking its way up and around the mountains. I passed a couple of people with a yak in tow, drove past one tiny little village, and saw some mountain goats. The trip through the mountains took me way longer than I had anticipated. I was in the middle of nowhere, and it was starting to get dark. I'm not normally worried about driving in the dark, but these dirt roads were already dangerous in the daytime. At night, they were deadly. There are no guardrails to stop you from simply driving off the mountain. But I had nowhere to stop for the night, so I crept at a snail's pace along the road. I must have slammed on the brakes 3 times. Once for a gazelle, another time for a fox, and then a 3rd time when someone ran across the road. I put the car in neutral, got out, and peered into the night to see if I could see the person who had just run across the road. As I was looking around, it occurred to me that whoever this person was, they would have had to have been able to fly, because the direction that they were running in was basically right off of a sheer cliff. I walked over, cautiously, and peered over the edge, but I couldn't see anything. That was when I suddenly felt like 1,000 eyes were watching me. I had goosebumps all over, and I suddenly felt very cold. I ran back to the car, got in, and cranked up the heat. Then I heard it, and my heart started pounding in my chest. It was the sound of far-off chanting. Well, that's what it sounded like when I was in the car. I slowly got out of the car again, and it sounded as if the chanting was all around me. It was like it was echoing off the mountains surrounding me. Instantly, I knew that it wasn't the sound of Tibetan monks. This was sinister. I knew that I had to get away from there. My instincts were screaming at me that I was no longer safe, and that I was most definitely not alone on that lonely road. I got back into the car and locked the doors. And just in time. Suddenly, someone stepped out of the darkness and stood in the middle of the road. They were wearing an all-white robe, and they were wearing the most terrifying mask I've ever seen. It was unnaturally round, with hollow, sunken eye sockets that were painted bright red, and a really wide, toothy grin spreading from ear to ear. Whoever it was, they started slowly walking towards my car. Then another one appeared at my window, and another on the other side of the car. They were just looking at me, and then they started trying to open the doors. Of course, I completely freaked out, and I just floored it. I really don't know how I didn't fly off the mountain, but I somehow made it into Nepal in one piece. I was on the next flight home. I finally feel ready to tell my story. This happened in April, a couple of years back. I live in Jackson, Tennessee, and I work in Henderson at the university. On the particular day in question, I had to work late. I had to get all of the class material ready before the semester got started in about 3 weeks. I finished up around 10 p.m., called my wife and told her that I was on my way, and then went down to my car. It was raining, and the sky was pitch black. I decided to take the main road back home because I was worried that the usual back roads might be muddy. I'm really glad that I made that decision. Otherwise, I probably wouldn't be here today to write this story. So I'm driving along listening to the radio. Then all of a sudden there's just static. I searched around between stations, but everything was just static. That's when I felt something hit my car. I swerved and then came to a complete stop. I thought maybe it might have been a black bear, since I didn't see anything before impact. I got out and turned on my cell phone flashlight, then walked to the front of my car. My car was badly dented. I decided to walk back up the road to see if the animal was still alive, and if not, to at least move it off the road. But what I saw confused me. It was a ripped tree stump. After staring at it for a while, I started dragging it off the road. Then suddenly I got goosebumps all over my body. For some unknown reason, my mind started screaming that I was in imminent danger. I looked around frantically, but there was no one and nothing to be seen. I decided it was probably best if I just got back in my car, since there were wildcats and cougars in the area as well. I was about 20 feet from my car when I froze. I couldn't move. I just stood there and watched as a tractor smashed down on top of my car. I heard a whistling noise which turned into a roar, and as I turned around, my blood ran cold. In the field, lightning ran across the sky, illuminating the unmistakable funnel of a tornado. It was so dark, so I couldn't determine which direction it was actually heading. I didn't know where to run, but I knew I had to try and get to safety. As I was standing there, staring at this monster, the wind started whipping around me, and it started to hail. I looked up the road and saw a light burning. It was a church. I ran as fast as I could, and debris was falling all around me. I was nearly crushed by a water tank. I finally reached the church. I was pumped up on adrenaline and fear. I was seized by the arm. It was the pastor, and he screamed at me to hurry up and follow him. As he closed the door of the basement, we heard the tornado ripping the church to shreds. It's just me, but I've never really been the type to believe in the supernatural, and I know humans can do all kinds of monstrous and despicable things, but nothing in this entire world is as terrifying as Mother Nature. When I finally got home the next day, most of the town had been reduced to rubble. If you thought these stories were scary, then make sure you watch this next video here if you really want to be scared.